Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about a brainwashed, long-lost prince. We're going to be talking about a method actor assassin, and our main topic of building history and myth in your world, here on Rise of the GM. Well, everybody, welcome back. We're glad to have you again. We are in the second installment of our world building sessions series, and we're going to be talking about some history and mythos of your world today. But before we do that, Adam, how are you doing today? I know we are a little late starting today. You have stuff going on in your life that we decided to kind of push stuff back. Things going well?
Yeah, things are going pretty well. Having a good week. If you're listening or watching and you hear what sounds like a bunch of kids running down a hallway, there's a good chance that's what it is.
So, there's a good chance it's either that or a bunch of kobolds.
Or it's a train that's acting weird. So, but yeah, had some kid pickup today. So thanks for the patience. And how about you? How's it going?
Well, we are, so as those of you who watch, most of you know that we are both in college educational settings, and the school I am at started back this week, and so we're thick in the start of it all. Adam still has this week off before he has to start next week, so he's living La Vida Loca, but I'm living the real Loca Vida. Nah, I really messed that up. Life's crazy, but good. Getting back into it. I think everybody in the educational setting, when you have that break, you get really used to it, and you don't feel like it's long enough, and then you're like, oh no, I got to get back into things, and that's life.
Yeah,
I'm sure several of our watchers and listeners can sympathize.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, let's get into our encounter starter from the Eureka book, where we kind of read through some of these encounter starters that they give you that you can drop into your settings. This one this week I'll start with is called the Dark Changeling. And so our group of PCs have been after some witch, whatever the reason that is in your game, where they have been fighting a witch. They rid the area of this evil witch, and when they do, they discover in her place a number of paintings, or I guess you wouldn't have photographs back in most of these medieval times, but paintings of a handsome young boy growing into a man. So from the time this little baby on up into a grown adult, and all of them are entitled "My Royal Son" in quotes. And if they continue searching, they'll find the witch's journal, where she reveals that she kidnapped the king's firstborn son decades ago, a long time ago, substituting a changeling, a doll that was enchanted to seem like an infant or a sickly child. And then she raised this boy as her own, using her dark magic to fill him with hatred for the king. Okay, so she's playing the long game here, the long con. It's common knowledge that the king's firstborn son died months after being born, and although he does have other children, he was diminished by the death. So that was his firstborn. It meant something to him. Final entry in the witch's journal reveals that she knows her end is near for whatever reason. Maybe she knew you guys were coming, your PCs. Her beloved son, she writes, will carry on her legacy by killing all his siblings, all the royal children, and then ascending to the throne. Might be kind of hard since everybody assumed he died, but that's the plan. There he will have ultimate authority to continue the witch's dark work, whatever that is, and you can make that up, whatever fits in your game. The party then, okay, so this is where the party finds all this stuff in her place, finds these paintings, this diary, and then the party has to get to the capital at once and prevent the royal son from carrying out his mission by any means necessary. He is very resourceful, may have the ability to change his appearance, right? So we find out he's a changeling. And here's the kicker. He's unaffected by a magic wards that are set to bar those without royal blood from entering the palace. And that must be the whole reason this witch did this, right? And that's why she played this long game. The PCs find themselves, they may find themselves sneaking into the palace. They're trying to. They don't have royal blood. Fighting the royal guards, trying to convince the guards that there's a plot, or even coming and demanding a midnight audience. So this is all like something that happens on a deadline. This is not something that they can sit
Right.
and think about, okay, in a week we're going to do this. They find out about this at 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, and the son's already on his way to do it for
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
reason, because
Right.
that was the enchantment. They've got to stop it. I like that. If the royal son, let's see, they got to, yeah. So this should not be an easy task.
Mhm.
This shouldn't be something that you just, oh yeah, you did it and it's done. This is going to be hard. And if the royal son's caught, the witch's enchantments can be removed, but that's going to be a long and difficult process that will probably leave scars on his soul. So the cool thing about this is that they find out, and it's something that they've got to attend to right away. Or if they don't, all the royalty in the castle is going to be killed, and he's going to be the only one left. So he's going to, I guess the king is still alive, and he's going to have to kill the king as well, whatever it is. I don't know how you could kill the king and all the kids, and unless you did it secretly to still, become the
Right.
royalty. I guess, blood was thicker than justice back then. But
Mm.
anyway, so that's the situation. That's the encounter. And when you hear this and you think about like, okay, what in this is intriguing to me? What sticks out?
Yeah. I think there's some setup that could be a very different result depending on like how that was done. It's one of the things I think about is I think that at least with like typically the tables we're playing at, um if this was like set before our table, I don't think it's gonna be one that's just like, oh, we're gonna walk away from this, we don't really care or whatever, like that's probably there is that. um we're showing up to play a game and to do these things, and there's some drive to do that. So I don't think it would be that, but I do wonder about like the setup prior of, you almost need to have them connected in a way to somebody enough where there's a care of like, okay, this is urgent because of not just like a large kingdom wide, well, the king's got to die and we need to go. I think some characters that would work for, but some other characters may just be like, what's the king to me, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, but also you need to have them not just have the ability to be like, hey, we're the heroes of the realm, we need to talk to the king, and then be ushered in, and then it all gets resolved like that. So it's kind of like a middle ground, I feel like, that I'm like looking at of there needs to be a setup enough where they're connected to the castle, the kingdom, the royal family, somebody who's in that town or something, without it being like doors flung open to them. So I think again about just like the setup of what's cool is there is this like setup originally of like the witch, they're dealing with a witch, and that probably has been a longer term situation than just like, oh, they came across somebody and they killed this witch in the forest, and now this is there. So you have a little bit of time, I think, in the midst of that to maybe connect in those ways. So I just am trying to think in terms of those things. If I was going to put this in the game, I would definitely want to have some forethought to like make connections prior to that before jumping in. But I really like the kind of the chase aspects of that. In any of those times when there's like a time that kind of gets, it's like there's a time crunch to this, we need to do that. Even way back when we talked about that one where the queen had went to sacrifice herself to stop the glacier that was coming in, and there was this aspect of like, we have to go, and whatever comes before us, we're going to have to knock down and keep moving because we need to get there before she does this. I think you get that again with this kind of thing where it's like, well, bandits, city guards, monsters, whoever's in the way is going to have to move because we got to get there. So I do like that urgency that happens with a story like this.
Yeah. And the cool thing about thinking about the setup, reading this and then thinking, okay, how am I going to set this up in the game? You also get to decide, you've been chasing a switch for a while. Why?
Mhm.
And then why could the witch maybe really hate the king so bad that she would decades long have this revenge? Maybe he's not the white hat all the way either. Maybe he's got a little gray in his past,
Yeah.
and you guys have to deal with that. But it definitely is worth setting somebody in your party up as caring about something with the royal family in some way, and then maybe having that conundrum of, oh, the king did this horrible thing, and that's why this witch did this in the first place, and so that all could be very,
Yeah. Yeah.
very fun. And I think the thing that makes this one kind of cool for me right off are the wards that keep anyone from royal blood, and I would put that as anyone with royal blood from entering like the inner living area.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that would be even like some guards couldn't get in there to protect. And no one ever expected this. And that's why this witch did this ingenious thought of, I
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
have someone with royal blood, because no one's ever been able, maybe the whole history and mythos of this kingdom is that assassins have been sent against it over and over. But because of the amazing wards that were put on in centuries past by one of the most powerful wizards, no one ever has been able to get past this because no one's had the royal blood. And so that could be a really, a big thing that maybe even one of you're all trying to get in there. Maybe one of your people somehow walks in and everybody's like, what?
Yeah.
and then,
Yeah.
and then you can play with that. That could be a really cool hook too. But I love that idea that it's such a powerful ward. It can't just be dispelled. You can't just go dispel magic, or any wizard would have come along and done that. And so what is it that you do to get in there to protect the king? Because this guy evidently would have already gone that way and walked in and is in there somewhere. And then how do you convince them? Or, what do you find out about your party? Maybe somebody having royal blood, and what does that mean for your story? And how can that influence your greater story? So that's a cool little encounter that not only could be dropped in, but could have some big reverberations as far as the king's morality and what he might have done in the past that's so bad. The witch and how you see her, even though maybe she's done bad things, maybe there was a justness behind it, although you don't go kidnap somebody's oldest son and put dark powers in him. Yeah. So what does that mean? Who knows? And that's the beauty of being a GM. You can drop that in and tailor that in such a way that your players end up with a really satisfying story that maybe takes them on some twists and turns along the way.
For sure. Yeah. I really like that, almost the catalyst or a driving piece of that being that royal blood cannot pass into this area kind of thing. I think that is really cool. This started the whole plot, of we need somebody to get in there kind of thing. That it's kind of interesting. And I feel like I could sit, and I don't want to just critique these constantly, but I think you could poke holes in some of the okay, well, how do you actually get to the end game here with this, the way that this has went? But I think you could even switch that end of this isn't about just killing everybody and ascending the throne. It's about, what if you needed somebody to get into this area to retrieve something?
Yeah.
And again, it is the long game. Yeah.
Something in there that has been put in there for centuries.
Yeah. Right.
And nobody could get to it at all.
Yeah.
Maybe the whole way to save the royal family is they all have to get out, because you can't even get in there to protect them.
Yeah. Right.
But they won't get out, because then you find out they have this thing in there, and they've got to protect that, and that's worth their lives maybe. And so I don't know. Yeah. And so
I like it.
It fits in really well with what our main topic is. And I'm just going to go ahead and transition this. And that is this idea that you, as a GM, you build a history and mythos, and then you begin to leak parts of this to your players. And it gives them this sense of, we're not just doing an episodic thing every week where it's something different, but there is a history that comes to bear on our present. And so we're talking about this. We automatically started doing this. What if there was something a long time ago, super powerful magician or wizard put these, tied to this family bloodline, and they put this thing of great power in this place for a reason. And then you get to start thinking, what is that reason? What is this artifact? Why this family and their bloodline? What have they done to deserve or not deserve the protection of that thing? And then you begin to build up this kind of history and mythos that you know about, and it becomes about, how do you begin to allow some of this out slowly, so
Mhm.
players begin to feel like there is more at work here than just like a quick encounter.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Usually I let Adam kind of
No, that's cool.
introduce
It's
these
great.
things, but Adam, is there more you want to say as far as introducing this idea of history and mythos?
No, I think that was really good. And even those things kind of began to bring some stuff out for me of that idea. You use the word like leaking or slowly. I do think that that's like a really cool way to do that, and we can talk about that more here in a bit. But actually, a friend of mine today, I heard the statement "drip and then drop," and it was in regards to like kind of an advertising of a thing, but I think that that's really good for even the way that like we can use history and mythos in things is like slowly there's these drips, there's these leaking, like you said, of you're getting little pieces here and there, and then eventually there is this payoff of okay, now we understand the history a little more. And so I've been thinking about that a lot today, and I think I'm glad you said that that way. The other kind of bit is just like that word why. I think drives me a lot for when thinking about history and myth and like the legends and things that have happened in the past and the worlds that we make. Is that question of like why we talked about like what if a lot, especially early on, and I know that's like a constant thing. And I think the why question again is a really good one too. Sometimes I may bring a certain amount of stuff to the table pre game starting. And even when I do that, I want to be asking like why is that? Like why is the world? We talked about map making in the physical world. Okay, why is there a giant like half mountain that's been smashed up in this island? And this is like a thing that we're in right now. It's like, well, let me think about that for a bit. One time in the past, this giant thing slammed into the ground and scattered it that way. Okay, well, why did that happen? And that's a thing that even recently has been like leading me down kind of a line of that. But I think in game sometimes like there's a little more spontaneity too of like a player asks to go do something or they find something and it's a little more off the cuff of creating something, and then I'll do that where I like walk away from that session if I haven't explained it in session and kind of start asking, okay, like why was that item here, or why was this place or this person the way they were, and that kind of helps me to get into that like history mode, of that too. So that was kind of stuff that kind of sparked out of what you just said for me is like asking the why question, and also that idea of like not just okay, we are starting a game, here's the entire history of my world, now let's play, but allowing that to like slowly kind of drip out and be absorbed and even be able to shift and change. I think is kind of a cool piece of that.
Yeah, I think so much of. So I'm going to say this: authors, they go to write a book,
Mm,
and they'll write a ton about each character's backstory. I'm sure this is the same with movies too. They'll write a ton about each character's backstory, every single character, their history, and then you get to see a small percentage of that in the book. They don't put everything in there. Why do
right.
they do this? One, they really want to, in their minds, have fully developed characters.
Mm,
Two, it begins to like sprout. Sometimes you'll hear authors sometimes say, as I was writing the book, I was surprised when this character did this. Okay, that's
mm,
how in the world you're writing the book. How are
right.
you surprised? Well, they build up enough credibility in their minds about like who this person is and what they've been through and what the world is about, that then they allow those characters in their imaginations to begin to act out of that. And it's the same thing with a game. You will, like an author, you will write a ton of history
Mm,
about what's going on in your world, or at least I do, and then you will reveal a small part of that.
mm,
Will reveal that as needed, but that doesn't mean that everything that you wrote is wasted or unused, because it allows you then to develop as the
right.
game goes on. And there are things that come to your mind that you would never have expected as your characters make actions and reactions to what you're doing. Your history is informing the way your NPCs and your characters, whoever it is that's important,
Mm-hmm.
it'll influence the way they act, and that's why it is this a kind of co-written,
Right.
co-told story between you and your players, and it has a lot to do with where do your NPCs come from. If you just have NPCs with absolutely no history, they're just like this character, they're going to feel flat. It's the same
Right.
way that an author who just decides to write like a teenage girl and has no idea of what this girl's been through, it comes off feeling like stupid. It comes off feeling like very plastic. And so we don't want to do that. We don't want to have like plastic characters that mean nothing. And the way to like invest them with meaning is to have history. And so you will do that. And it's like what's really cool, you think about some of your favorite authors or favorite movies, and one of your favorite things is when say you get to the end of Lord of the Rings or you get to the end of the Harry Potter series, and then they do this like bonus material section where they sit down with
Mm-hmm.
the author or they sit down with the director and they start talking about stuff, and you start getting all these stories of things that never came out in the stories, but they
Right.
like, you're like, oh wow, I had no idea, but that makes so much sense. And then you put that stuff together. Think of yourself like that as a GM, that like there's going to be some of this stuff that you're not going to talk about until the bonus material. Now here's the thing, I love to tell all the stuff that I know that didn't come out. Usually Adam is the only one who gets that because I don't get a chance to sit down with all of my players afterwards. And maybe this is a good thing that you could do. When a campaign ends, have some
Mm.
bonus material sessions where you sit down and you say, hey, did you guys know
Yeah.
that this was why this happened? And did you know that this was why that person did this? And this is where they came from. And that's, and your players might be like, oh, really? Oh, and it's kind of that whole bonus material section. I think that is a really fun part that sometimes we miss out on. We used to do this thing called Roses and Thorns, where after sessions we would say, "Hey, this was really good," as a player to the GM. This, I thought you did this really well. This didn't come off so well, and that's cool. But do we always have the denouement, after the story for the
Right.
author, for the storyteller to sit down and say, "Hey, here's some really cool things that you guys may or may not have picked up on, and here's some stuff that you definitely would not have picked up on." And have those kinds of that's something I think we should all
Yeah.
add to our games. The
Yeah.
hard part is usually a game will either kind of peter out toward the end, and that's why we start a new campaign, or time just for some reason somebody moves or something stops the game, and another one starts up so quick that we don't take time for that. So
Yeah.
adding that in would be really cool. But all of that to say,
Mhm.
when you get all that stuff written and you have a lot of history, which I know I do that, I have a lot of history that my players don't know about, then you have to start thinking, what are the ways I'm going to drip that? And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the next area I'd like us to talk
Mhm.
about is what are ways that you have, and maybe you've thought of this, maybe you haven't, what are ways that you employ to drip information so that it's not like all right, let's sit down and now here's all of the history, blah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
vomit all this information on people. What are
Yeah.
ways you drip some of that information throughout your game?
Hmm. Yeah. I was thinking about that a little bit over this last week, and kind of there's always, I think, like maybe the most used, I don't know if that's the right term for this, but it's probably like kind of that quest giver kind of person, that I think a lot of times in my games there's a certain point where uh and I guess that's less of the drip and that's more of the like, okay, this is a thing that you need to know, kind of deal. So it's a little more heavy handed with that. But having that person who, is like the the wise old hermit that you've interacted with who suddenly is now like, well, I used to be an adventurer too, and this is the thing that happened long ago that I need you to take. It's like then you get that kind of a situation of hearing hearing like the past and hearing those kind of things. So I think there can be like a quest giver kind of person to have a little more like, here is a specific aspect of that. I think a little bit less heavy can be like a use of maybe like an oracle or a like the fortune teller. I think we brought that up at one point too, of like that being a part of a festival, and being able to share like these things in the history. I think we've used like writings. The group comes across like some sort of ancient writing that explains some of the happenings that are going on and some of those things. But I don't know. I have a little more, but like, what do you think in that, Matthew?
Well, for me, so I thought as I was thinking about this topic, I thought, okay, what have I done? And instead of like, what could I do? What have I done? And I was like looking at our last campaign that we're in here, the Dormant Mine, and I started off. I kind of came up with 5 different ways that I have kind of begun to sprinkle some of the history of what's going on in this world and the mythos of this world. So in this world, first of all, you guys start off not really knowing about the old gods. You've maybe heard of them, but I don't talk too much about them. And so as a player,
right,
you don't really know about them. So I think the first kind of way I began to drip some of that and to intrigue you. So you guys didn't get a quest when you started. You didn't have somebody say, hey, here's the quest. You had a friend who's like, hey, I need help. And you guys went down to see like, I think it was your friend, Adam, that was being falsely accused. That's the way it all started. You didn't really have this is a world bending quest.
Right.
This all kind of developed out of that helping the friend. But in doing that, there was a note from Lucas Reeling, which you found out was the youngest son of the emperor. And he was in this town. And there was a note you found that said something like, oh, the Dreamstone has fallen in our lap, which is good because I don't think Arafel would have fallen as easily as the thief or the sage. And you guys are like, what in the world is he talking about? And then you begin to like be curious. And then as you were going, I don't even know at that point if you had any idea who the sage or the thief were, or Arafel for that matter, or the Dreamstone or any of this. These were words. And this is something that I love when I read a good book. They'll drop these words and thoughts and ideas. And at first you don't know what they are. And so you just kind of have to hold them as a placeholder. I read once that people who read a lot do this really well. They can take an unfamiliar concept and hold it like a coin, even long before they know what it's going to be. And then when they come across like more clues, those things begin to make sense. That's what makes a good reader. And it's the same with a gamer. So you drop these like little coins, these things people pick up and they don't know what they are exactly, and they hold on to them. And so then at some point, you guys actually met Arafel. And at that point, you may not have truly understood, like, what does it mean for someone to be a god or a goddess? Oh, wait, this is one of those. And you got some information there, and you begin to get a little bit more about what is the history and mythos of the world, because she started talking about this darkness that's going to sweep the land and the dreaming stone, and you guys had to like begin to think more about that. Then as you were traveling through the countryside, you were hearing common people say this prayer about, and I can't remember, maybe you remember it, maybe Josh remembers it. It's the something, the something, the something, the sage, the righteous, the something, the wild of our age. It was basically the list of the gods. And I should know that because goodness knows I made it up.
It's been a bit.
I just didn't write it down here. Anyway, it was basically a listing, a liturgy of the 12 gods. And people would say this kind of as a prayer, just off the cuff. They would be saying this prayer. And then you guys, like hearing that, you came across these huge, gigantic statues that were representations of those. And you weren't told, okay, so this is the righteous, this is this is the sage, this is the reaper, this is the monster. You saw them, and it began to click. And I think there's something to letting your players' brains have those moments of discovery And so that happened. Fourth way that I saw in my own stories, you guys then came across this. You were in deep winter, and you came across this bunker, and there was a girl in there with like skin where her eyes would be, and her mouth was sewn shut, and you had no idea who she was. You could do nothing. But when she went to sleep, one of you had a dream staff, and when you put that dream staff over Josh just put it in here. The reaper, the righteous, the silent, the sage, the dreamer, the devil, the wild of our age. That was a prayer that common people would say as they would go about their business. And, whether looking for favor or warding off evil or whatever, they would say that. And you guys would hear that. And then it began to make more important this idea of the old gods, the 7 gods. And then you begin to like actually make these clues about like who are each of these gods, which one's the silent, which one's the sage, which one's the dreamer, which one's the reaper, And so I think, again, it's getting you curious and you searching for what is the history that makes the history and mythos coming out all that more exciting. But then you get to this place where there's this girl whose mouth is sewn shut, and one of you has this dream staff, and you put it over her head while she's sleeping. And while you do, you encounter what's called an ancient skald, which is basically a way of saying like this ancient bard of sorts, a warrior bard. And this bard begins to tell you a story of Strugafjorga, right, in the north, which you begin to put together that this is one of those gods. This is the god of the north. And then you begin to place these gods with the kingdom. But you get this whole story, not just of Strugafjorga, but you get this story of what happened with the emperor and his wife and how they were trying to make a deal with a demon. And again, this is dripping out some of the history and mythos, some of the why are we doing any of this anyway? You guys have already heard about a darkness overcoming the world because someone made a deal. And now you're hearing about this emperor who is making a deal with a demon in a totally different place, in a totally different part of the world. But you're also hearing it in conjunction with some more information about the gods and the power stones that you guys are finding. And all of this mythos and history is being leaked out. Let's see. The fifth way I realized you guys never took advantage of, but I had a fifth way. And so I went ahead and listed it here. This was in the house of stacked knowledge. So I had this crazy house that looked tiny. When you go in, it's huge, much like a TARDIS.
Bigger on the inside.
Right? But there's all these stacked books, and it's not like a library that is neatly ordered with a Dewey Decimal System. It's just books stacked horizontally on books, all these stacks. But what you guys didn't know were there were some stacks in there that no matter what you were looking for, this stack would always have on top the thing you were looking for that would give you some information. You guys were too interested in what you were doing at that time as far as finding out whatever the mission you were on, that you didn't look at any of the books. You didn't actually pick up some of these that would have given you, it was a way I was going to allow you to find out more about the history and about what was going on and what your mission was and some of that, which I've never actually told you what your mission is. You guys right now, and this isn't ongoing, so I'm not going to tell you, but right now, this party has no idea what it is they're exactly trying to do. They know that there is a problem. They know that there are these power stones, and they've kind of been collecting them. They still don't know exactly what is it that we're going to do at the end of this. And I know. And I know it's going to be exciting and fun. But this is part of the drip. Part of the drip is that they get it a little at a time. And the other part of the drip is I don't tell them everything I know. And there's going to, when we get to the end of this, there's going to be stuff that I never said. And this is something that was in it. But then hopefully I do a director's cut, the bonus features where I sit down and I tell them. Hopefully I remember by that time because this thing's been going on for years and we took some huge breaks. And that's all not because of my players. It's all because of me. When I get into the school year, my brain creative capacity goes way down. So I take these large breaks. And then when I am not doing all the stuff I do here in school, my brain capacity and my creative capacity gets big again. Of course, then everybody's on break for summer. So I don't know when we're going to end this, but maybe if I'm not senile by that time, I will tell you of all the stuff that you didn't know as we went through it. So anyway, this was like, as I look through that first, or this campaign that I'm in, this is some ways that I drip out and build some of that history that I have written, and I begin to let it go. And the cool thing is, some of that is changed as we go because of what my players choose to do, and thoughts that come to me as we go. But I look back to one before that. I had an Oracle of Order. Obviously, in that one, you guys started off meeting this Oracle, and he had this. He just was this kind of crazy man who said this prophetic poem over and over, and you had no idea what that meant. But as you went through, the campaign, those lines begin to make more sense and lead you to. Hopefully, they made more sense and they led you to where you were going. You also met. So in that one, I looked back and I had a companion, a foil, and a mystery that led you on. So the companion was Mira, the girl that you were romantically involved with, who ended up being the emperor's wife. And then there was Rollo, the foil that was never meant to be. But he ended up being someone important in there and would kind of drip some information to you guys. And then there was this guy you were chasing that was a mystery, Huntman. And you're like, who is this Huntman? And you're chasing him and trying to figure out more about him. And through that, you get more information. And then I think there was a journal in there too, which was a lot like the House of Stack Knowledge. So I use kind of some of these same techniques to make sure information is given. And I don't know if you have other ways that you allow information to kind of happen, or other thoughts after I kind of went through that litany of ways that I use.
Yeah, I think that's really cool because as you were, I do want to, before I answer, I want to make note of Wataya Hotel's comment in the chat. Matthew, would you consider yourself the George R.R. Martin of campaigns?
Are you saying because I haven't finished the last book yet?
Patrick Rothfuss over here.
I think maybe you are onto something, because unlike them, though, I am still actively, I haven't led, I haven't been the GM in a while, even though I say I have all this going on. And they say the same thing, right? George R.R. Martin says he's been writing that last book.
We're holding on. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. We talk about it. That was a good call. That was funny. Some of the stuff like you were even mentioning about the Dormant Mind, about that campaign, like those are moments like the Reaper of the Righteous, the Silent, the Sage, like that moment where these people are chanting, and we kind of came out into this like open space, and there's these like the statues that you mentioned, these like gigantic things. That I remember that being like a big aha, like for me, kind of stuff, where it was like, oh, like that was a drop where all the little coins that you had been giving did come together. Not fully, because there was, like you said, there was a lot of stuff we had to work out, and it wasn't like, oh, here's a placard that says this is the sage. It was like, well, we're going to make some thoughts come together here. But that was a really big one. I do think the Scald, again, that was like a coming together of, okay, all these pieces have now interlocked again, where we have some understanding, and a lot of stuff where it's like, now I have a lot more questions too. And even you didn't mention it as much, but you talked about the stones and like these wizards that were like the making of the construct that could find them, and these stones and all the that are connected to those old gods in different ways. Like that was another kind of the third piece for me in your game, where I was like, oh wow, like there's connecting points that are happening that I wasn't like really putting together until that point. So I think like you said, the drip is like really good. There's lost my train of thought on that, so it'll come back to it. But I like in my I'm going to come back. Sorry for all you listening. This is awesome. But Rollo, the foil, you brought that up, and that's a really cool way of, I think, like you mentioned those being kind of, there's a theme with those people, Huntman being the mystery and stuff. But Rollo, I think there's a good point in there, in that convo of like, this isn't something that you have to, and I don't know when you knew those kind of titles of those people or like that idea, but like you said, Rolo was like, that was not supposed to be the dude. Like it was the interaction we had and the way that we reacted. And I think there's a good piece in there of like, as a GM, as you're learning your craft, or if you're like just trying to expand a little bit, like being cool with that. Okay, this is something that like actually landed, or I was not expecting it, but like they grabbed onto this. So we can move this in this direction and like let this be a part of the story that maybe wasn't there. And that's really, in a lot of ways, my story for the current campaign we're in. And I know we've told part of it, but it's like this was supposed to be a 2-shot that turned into a campaign. So there was a bit for me where I was like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And again, we were trying to do I was planning on it being more of a like, okay, this is street level roguery, that's happening. I'm going to try to keep it in urban setting, and it failed to do that. But, and we had this situation where in a lot of ways, you talk about the characters that take on a life of their own for an author. In a lot of ways, this campaign got out of hand for me because it's like, we've told the story, but it's like there was this trick played from one character to another, or one player to another. And, but that became, is like this ley line that was seen became so much of the story. And that started opening up more of the history, because it's like, well, this thing's here. And then I'm out of the game sitting around thinking, and I'm like, what if it wasn't just this one random one that I don't really know what I was doing, but what if it was like spokes of a wheel and it was attached to cardinal directions? Well, why would that be? Okay, well, what if they're like binding something there? Which I have realized I really like things that are bound and about to get out. I've realized in like thinking through these things, that's like a trope that I have a lot. But so I'm thinking through that. It's like, well, there's something there. Okay, well, what could that be? And like, why are these people attached? And the party had went north to the farthest north, basically had been following this line, interacting with it several places. There were several times that it's like, okay, obviously things are being drawn to the power of these lines. Like there's, these people trying to do a dark ritual near a line. There's other things happening near a line. And when you guys got to the end of it, I think even at that point, I wasn't sure about the attachment to the deities of the world until we hit that. And that was when it kind of was like, okay, there's a deity connected to this, because the Thieves Guild master was given the power to do that by Mask, God of Thieves. So now there's a deity connected to this. What if like all the spokes had a deity? Maybe I'm like telling things that aren't known, but like, I think enough has been figured out with that now that you guys know that. But that was like an ongoing growth thing where I felt like it was my thoughts, but the campaign, like as the story was told with the characters, as more things were asked and questions, like I mulled through, the history began to unfold even for me. and now it's like, there's things where I can like drip them, and they have been, where I feel like there can be a drop later. But at first for me in that game specifically, that was kind of the way it went. Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
No, I was just going to say, I want to quickly interject something here. This is a channel for GMs, right? For game masters who are trying to figure out, how do I run a good game? Maybe you've had games that fell flat before. Maybe you've had games that you didn't enjoy as a GM yourself. And I just want to say, this is an important thought. And I know I've said this 100 times, and I'll probably say it 100 times as we do this, but like, if you think you have a plan for the game and you plan everything out, and then it's just getting your characters to go through that game, it'll probably fall flat for you at some point, and you'll probably get bored with it at some point, and you'll probably be tired of it and be ready to be done as a GM before you get to that end, because you know everything that's going to happen. Just like one of the types of fun, I think, was discovery. Was that one of the types? I think it was.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
just like that can be discovery for players, I think as a GM, you have to put yourself in that place too and allow yourself to be discovering twists in the plot. Even though you have an idea of where you want it to end up, if you just write it on paper and then run it straight, it's going to, for you, you're not going to have much fun as a GM. I think part of the entire party having more fun is when the GM is also having fun discovering, when the GM is also twisting the story as he goes and like discovering new paths and new objectives and new ways that the gods are linked to this, or that the people that you interact are, allowing yourself to be discovering as you go and letting things change. I know that it's a little more scary as a GM to start when you don't know exactly where everything is going to go. There's this tendency to say, I want to plan everything out because then I'm in control. But there is something to letting that control float and discovering stuff. You're still in control, but like allowing that to twist and rotate and change as you go is important as a GM. And so I'm going to always be the proponent of don't get it too set in stone how things are going to go. So I'm sorry to jump in there. You just made me think of that as you were talking about doing that exact thing in your game.
Yeah, totally. That's good. Yeah, I think there's like maybe shorter term. I got to be honest, I dropped part of the call here during part of that. So
that was where I said Adam is the best GM ever. No, I did. I do believe. I'm not saying I didn't say
that. I got a lot of work to do, but I think like that more straight line kind of situation is probably good for shorter. Like you could probably do a shorter thing and not feel so. I just feel like I'd be up against the constraints and maybe even fighting the players the whole time if I was just trying to like push that through like my story, kind of thing. And so I didn't hear everything. Sorry for that, but that was kind of in my mind as you were talking there. I had some, and it's the beauty. We've talked a little bit about this too, of like that idea of maybe playing multiple games or multiple campaigns in the same setting, kind of thing. I think could be interesting in a lot of ways. And one of them that I really like with the history building is, so this game that we're in was like the same world as my first game, and that I like did on my own and played.
I think we've frozen up with Adam here again. Looks like he's having internet troubles there. He'll be back in just a second, but I want to comment. This is behind Adam's back. He doesn't know what we're saying. That idea of being in the same world and having all that history that some other GM or maybe you before as GM did, and being able to take and make your statement on that. It's almost like these reboots that you see where you have Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's story is well known, but then like this new director will come along and say, hey, here's something that I wanted to play with the idea of Spider-Man. Now, not necessarily recreating the origins of your world every time, but being able to take something that is known and put a spin on it that makes people like think, oh, that's cool. Sorry, Adam, you were frozen there. So I just kind of took off on this idea of working in a world where there was already a history, whether you created that in a previous one or someone else did, and being
Yeah.
able to take that and build on that knowledge and add your own twist, kind of like these when you get a movie that's made over and over again, and you already
Right.
know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know the main story, you know that's not going to change because that's canon, but then they take and twist some things.
Yeah.
Now I don't like it when they change too much,
Yeah.
but to take and build on that. So you
Yeah.
were saying before you
Right.
left.
Yeah. Yeah. To kind of go with that, I like, even there's a certain point I think with like a familiar setting. So maybe you have a table who you have people that really know the Forgotten Realms setting for D&D, or um, Galarian for Pathfinder, or whatever it is. And I think like sometimes the baggage that comes along, baggage, I'm going to use that term, like the stuff that you're carrying in with you about familiarity can be like a helpful thing, where it like sparks kind of your mind a little more of like, oh, like I'm making like some connections here. And that can be cool too. I don't think we have really gotten to that place. Um, there's certain things that maybe sometimes I think that like you as a player may remember, but it also was 17 years ago or something like that when we were playing my first campaign, and so
I think
like,
you give me too much credit for my
yeah.
memory.
I realize that over, every now and then I'm like, oh yeah, there's this thing, and I'm like wondering if maybe you'll be like, oh, but
You're looking at me with a smile on your face, and I'm
like
sitting there like,
but I think if we got to that point, I had that a lot. I had that a lot for the Dormant Mind, because I can't remember how much you talked about this, but the parallel kind of campaigns that I've gotten to play in, where one group was doing this in the world, and then when that people moved and we kind of stopped that, then we started this other game that's like running parallel, and I'm over here like, like meeting people that the other group met, and I'm a different character, so I gotta not meta that, but it's like that I got to have a lot of fun with that story and the things that I knew as a player, but the character didn't know.
by the way, for those of you who don't know, I started a campaign with a group of guys, and then many of those guys moved, and we ended up, this was before we knew we could game online so easily. And we're like, okay, I guess this one's over. And so I did what I thought was a total party kill just to end it. But we had one player who might still be alive. Anyway, then we started gaming with a new group of guys, but I still felt like I had already thought so much about this. I'm like, you know what? We're going to go into this world again. And so we did. A whole different group kind of picked up at a different place. And then their stories kind of converged at some point, and the second party went on. But it was cool because Adam was in both of those parties. He was the one who was the carryover, and so he did get to see that story developing in two totally different ways, and knowing some stuff that was going to be coming, and then all of a sudden hitting this place where everything was new from here on out. So that's what he was talking about with all of that.
Yeah.
Wasn't something I planned, but it is something that is kind of neat to experience.
Yeah, but I think that's really cool. Those kind of, and even like on a more general level of like being able to bring in things. But I've liked to kind of going back to that, like I'm running a second campaign in the same world 20 years apart. And so from a GM standpoint, it's like I have some things to pull from that maybe I wouldn't have if I had chosen for this to be a completely different world or setting kind of thing. That even it's the appendices that nobody sees, or my writing notes that are in the file back there, but I can draw from that sometimes. And so I've gotten to do that with this game. And then the WoW world that Onan, that was one that I used for another campaign one time, and I brought the world back, but it was like 500 years in the future or something like that. And
dystopian.
Dystopian. And so it was like the world and the history were there, but then I could kind of clean sweep all the current events and bring it to like where I wanted it to be. And that was like really nice for me as a GM to be able to use that stuff as kind of fodder. So I really do, I encourage you all out there, like if you're ever like going to start another game, to consider like playing around in the same sandbox, and making some changes, but like using that, because I think it can be a big help for us to be able to do that. So like my first game, and this is part of the unveiling for even me, my first game was, part of it was, there was a wizard trying to get a hold of a staff that should have been locked away a long time ago. And that thing was also kind of connected to the gods of the world. And when it was actually taken, it unleashed this creature. I actually used a Tarask in that game, which is crazy to me. Probably didn't run it right. But like the Tarask, it was basically, I think you were level like 18 or 19 by that point, and took on a Tarask. And so that happened, and it was kind of this thing that happened in the game. But when I came over to this, and then it's like, okay, I'm asking those why questions. All right, what's bound under this city from all the ley lines coming in that these gods have put in place? Okay, well, let's call it a Titan, and it's like one of these like creatures of old that's just massive and has all this power. It'd be really interesting if there were more of those. And that was like a drip. There was one point where the party came through, and there was actually a table holding something that had the 3 Titans on it. And I don't know if anybody actually paid much attention to that, but it was like, that was a thing that I hoped would like trigger in the brain at some point. So as I was going on, I'm like, you know what? As I'm like releasing some more of this information, the group here, hopefully still remember, but there's the one that they're dealing with. There's one far to the north that seems to be under control. And then one was released at one point. It's like, what if that came from, this is in the same world. These guys destroyed Tarask is, whatever. But it's like, they fought this giant thing. What if that was the third type? So that stuff all has kind of built together. And I've really enjoyed, from my standpoint, being able to tie some of that stuff in and connect the two groups in ways that I didn't really expect when I started the game. So it's nice to have some stuff in your back pocket that you can tie in that way.
Yeah, we have one of our watchers right now made this comment here. He says it's so daunting to create an entire world sometimes. So reusing or using one from a previous campaign really takes that weight off your mind. It made me think of, I don't know, I was trying to actually remember, there was a Shakespearean play where there were 2 minor characters in the play that just had like on and off in the scene. And then later someone wrote a play about those 2 characters. And with that then came all of that like idea of what Shakespeare had written. Right. But they went in, in their own story. If anybody remembers that, you can throw that in the chat. I know that was a super vague description, but that idea is really cool where, you sometimes you have this character that maybe just kind of passed through a campaign, and you take and you make something completely off of that, or a place that you pass through. Oh, here we go. I was thinking that Barry would be the one who would remember this.
Thinking he'd come through for us here.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. What does that mean? Sounds very daunting. Was that the name of the second play?
That's what it sounds like.
He can get back to us there. But yeah, so anyway, that idea of branching off of a tiny part. And we've mentioned this before, that you can be in a world and like maybe there's like this area over here that's never been explored, and you just put your stuff there, and you use all of that history and stuff. And it's not so daunting. Sometimes you want to kind of build something from nothing and let people discover it as they go, including you as a GM. You just start in this tiny town, and as it grows, you begin to build a mythos and world around it. And sometimes you want to like have this mythos that has already been kind of laid out there, and then you want to take it and move it in a new direction. And like we said, you can like like the Spider-Man movies, you can put your own spin on some of that stuff and people then recognize it and it means a little something to them. So very, very cool ways to talk about history and mythos. And however you do it, whether you're just dripping stuff that people are figuring out for the first time, or whether you're laying down some stuff that they may recognize. And this, again, Adam said this, you may play in, what world was it that Drist was in? Was that D&D?
That's Forgotten Realms.
Forgotten Realms. You know, if they hear stories about this, like dark elf that used to fight with 2 scimitars, almost everybody who's ever read anything, you know, Forgotten Realms is going to know that's Drist. You don't have to bring him into your campaign. You don't have to have an appearance from Drist, but like hearing those rumors or, you know, of some of the other characters in there can kind of set people's minds like, oh, I know who that is. That means that around here, this must have happened. And then you can, you know, move away from it and not get too into that, R.A. Salvatore, the author, not get too much into his stuff, but, you know, again, that kind of little call out too. So it's really cool to do that. And again, part of world building is this history and mythos and being able to place your people in a place that they feel has this solid grounding, that has this history, that has stuff going on in the world that they don't necessarily always have a hand in.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
Anything else you want to say about history or mythos before we move on to our NPC and our haversack for this week?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys, again, we're not always like 100% thorough on these things. We kind of throw out thoughts we're having. If there's stuff that you have questions about or thoughts you have, always drop them in our comments, drop them in our haversack. But we're going to move on right now to our NPC. We like to have an NPC that you can take and possibly throw into a campaign that you're using. Once again, we're back to a villain this week. We had our first non-villain last week, and those are going to make appearances more often. But we do have one this week that Adam's going to read to you.
I think he's just misunderstood.
He's just misunderstood. Well, we'll be the judge of
that. This is Lucian the Beggar Prince. He's a humble assassin. Misunderstood. Humble assassin.
It's so humble.
His appearance is covered in soot and grime and dressed in beggar's rags. Lucian ambles with the shuffling gait of a man who has spent his life in the streets. Only his hard, flinty eyes hint at his true nature. Lucian ducks and bobs his head when he talks, bows to anyone who looks well off, and reaches out for coins with a quavering hand. His humble life belies Lucian's great pride in his talents as a killer. He's unmatched among assassins, and he knows it. He feels no remorse, and he views a perfect assassination as a piece of artwork, not murder. Lucian likes pulling the wool over people's eyes, and he's always on the lookout for information on potential targets. His background is that a decade ago, Lucian discovered that an assassin who can blend in with the city's poor gains numerous advantages, and he's never looked back. He's amassed a vast fortune, but regards accessing it as a sign of weakness. Whenever possible, he works with only the tools at his disposal. No one in the city knows his dual identity, though a few suspect that he runs a guild of beggar thieves. He wears a disguise when he needs to move in high society and when meeting potential clients. Lucian is only truly happy when planning and carrying out an assassination. So Lucian the Beggar Prince. And his phrase is, "Spare a copper for a poor sinner, your eminence," as he reaches out. That's my way of saying it, at least.
My favorite part of this is the fact that he is disguised. Well, he is the beggar thief his whole life. And only when he goes into his, like, where he has to like interact with people as a well-to-do person, right, every time he does that, he disguises himself so nobody knows who he is. So it's not like everybody knows, okay, here's this rich guy, and like he goes out and disguises himself and assassinates people as a beggar. No, he lives as a beggar, and he sees, like you said, accessing this wealth as a weakness. And so he just doesn't do it. And when he has to like be in that role, that's the time he's playing. I love that. I don't
Yeah,
know,
it's great.
maybe nobody else has ever done this but me, but like I live in my realm of imagination a lot, not just as a GM, but in my day-to-day life. And so I've often had these little daydreams and thoughts about like, if I ever won like this windfall of money that was huge, like say I won, one of those $1.5 billion lotteries that people win. I'm like, how cool would it be to just continue living life the way you are, but have all of this resources, but never tell anybody. And then when you had to like use your resources,
Hmm.
you would have to somehow disguise yourself so people didn't know it was you. That's what I feel like this guy does. It's like he somehow has a lottery winning that he
Right.
knows is there, but he doesn't want anybody else to know. And so the only time he ever like when he spends money, he always disguises himself then so nobody knows it's him.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
that was the most interesting part of this,
That
aside from
is.
the fact that he assassinates people.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. It's that flipped idea of you would think that the person would put on the disguise of the beggar, but it's
Right.
like he is a method actor here in that. But yeah, I was trying to think of like interactions uh, with the PCs. If you're gonna like bring him into that, and where I do feel like I like him a lot, but I feel like it gets a little difficult because what they're seeing is a beggar, and that's going to be pretty like he's good at what he does. So there's not going to be a lot of suspecting of, oh, this guy's something else, but he is that. But I guess like for me, I'm wondering. Again, it's always like turning it to an encounter, but if you experience him in his beggar form, and maybe they experience him in his like they're at a feast or festival, and they experience him in his like fake dressed up rich person form, or maybe you see him in as he's doing a job, and he's disguised himself for some reason for that too. It's like there's like one thing he has a half moon tattoo behind his ear, and you're like realize, oh, that guy also has that, but they look completely different. Like I feel like you have to do almost something like that to make it come out finally, and drop some of those hints, for like a payoff even with the NPC. Um, but I feel like he could be in the background of a lot of things, especially if you're like in this urban kind of area.
Yeah, I mean, if I were using this guy in a campaign and I didn't want him to become like an encounter, I didn't want him to become a goal for them to dispense of or to solve, I would make some rather memorable rich people. I would make him different. I wouldn't make him like always every time he's the rich person of himself.
Yeah, right.
He's the same guy. I would make
Different.
different guys that they encounter different times throughout this campaign. And again, I love playing the long game. And then when that dawn of realization hits somebody, it's
Mhm.
so much greater. But like they would meet this person early on, and then they would never
Yeah.
see that person again. Then they would meet this other person, and they would remember when they think of like kind of maybe flamboyant characters or like interesting characters. You'd have to make them like
Mhm.
enough over the top that they remember him, but then they never see him again. Maybe to the point that they tell stories about this guy. Oh, and then this
Yeah.
guy, and then at some point in the future, they either see two or three of those again,
Mhm.
and then they figure out it's this beggar, or they don't,
Yeah.
and then they have to go
Right.
from there. And so that would be what I would do with it.
For sure. Yeah. I like that. We have a couple questions today
The
from the
haversack
Haversack.
has some
Um,
stuff in it.
do have some. Got a one from Evan, who was here last week, and we were joking around about how he could have sent a question in for himself also, but he sent one in this week from the Haversack, and we got another one from Wataya Hotel too. We'll start off with the two questions from Evan, and he said this is titled Haversack Questions Batch January 8th. Hi, Matthew and Adam. With the world building series in full swing, a couple related questions come to mind. Thanks for the great discussions, Evan Bright. And really thankful Evan got to come on and talk last week too. So that was really good times. His first question is this: have you ever come up with a setting that would make certain core races or classes rare or non-existent? For example, the gods going on a millennia-long lunch break means no clerics, or all the elves sailed to Valinor, or things like that. What type of setting premise would you place with that type of setting premise? I'm sorry. Would you place the same restrictions on the PCs or let them be the world's only gnomes? So we'll start with that one. Settings.
I can say
kind of
I've never made a setting where there was like one race that was gone. Although I can see that being very interesting and being a nice hook for whatever your campaign is. And I would probably go the second route. I wouldn't say, hey, you can't be an elf. The elves have all left the land. I would say, okay, you're an elf. But you never see other elves. And when you tell people you're an elf, if you tell people you're an elf, they don't know what to make of you, or like look, they're disbelieving, or they think you're lying or something. And I would just let that play out as him being odd or a curiosity or something until they figured it out. That's probably what I would do. As I said, I've never done that, but that would be very interesting. And not necessarily just the elves have all left and you don't know where they've gone, but for whatever reason, I have done some, I think we've done some campaigns where it's like magic is really low for some reason. And I can't remember if we went very far with those campaigns. But like in such a case, there was probably a reason. And then because of that, okay, if somebody decides they're going to be a wizard, how do you deal with that? I don't think we had that come up, but it is worth thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I don't have a lot of the experience with that. The magic, the low magic thing I've thought about a lot, where it's like what would it look like if the world really didn't have magic, or only certain very, very specific people had magic, and these were these crazy wizards that were super powerful, but then one of your PCs, I think of that more as a storytelling device where it's like, okay, well, one of the PCs actually is a wizard. There's going to be an issue there, but that hasn't come up in actuality for me. I have a couple times thought about the different race, maybe having some limits on what people could do because of story elements. So there was the Impending Doom campaign I did. I tried to change up kind of the typical way that we think. The elves were not forest dwelling artisans and just crazy long life. That they were more, they lived out in the plains and they were nomadic and they stayed away from everybody else. And that was one reason I was going to try to keep that a little bit, keep them kind of separate, but it ended up that nobody wanted to play an elf anyway. So it was okay, well, this works out because I don't have to do the juggling. I don't have to do the juggling act kind of thing here, because it just happened to work that way. And I'm trying to think, I did do a class thing with this game that I'm doing now. But that was focused around not the world really, but it was, I guess, the small scale world of, they were in the Thieves Guild. And I was trying to limit a little bit, this makes sense that you would be a thief, kind of thing. And I guess any class could probably do that, but I did try to limit that to make it a little more, hey, maybe you'll be a little more of a sneaky type person, or that, which didn't happen.
I was going to say, how'd that work out for you?
Not great.
I think he said, did you say no bards? And then immediately,
no barbarians.
No barbarians. And then immediately, Ben West. We had a guy who was a barbarian.
It worked.
He's like, whoops. And then we also had a dude who's like covered head to toe in like metal armor. He's like, I'm a thief. Clang, 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 clang.
It
Not going to name him. I'll let
Luckily,
him find this on his own.
luckily, it's expanded, so you're not doing as much stealth missions. But
we haven't been very thievy lately.
Yeah, but that kind of stuff, I think has happened for me. I do think I think that's totally viable to make those things happen. My recommendation for anybody is like have that session 0 conversation with your group of like, here's kind of what I'm thinking and this is why. And like, can we like be cool with that? And if you're like, no, I gotta be a cleric, you got to bring the gods back. It's like, well, maybe we can figure something out with that. So having those conversations, I think is really good, whatever you choose to do in that. So Evan's second question there is, what's your typical process for coming up with fantasy names for people and places?
You want to take first stab or you want me to?
I have a very unscientific way of just making noises a lot of times. And
his name is Urfag.
Or like, this came to mind and it sounds cool. Where could that be? This sounds like a harbor. I play with words. Every now and then I'll get into a lock and I'll pull out like a generator. And I don't know that I ever am like, yes, I want that exact thing that the generator spat out. But sometimes it spits a word out that I'm like, that's similar to what I want. What about this? Or these two things together rather than, so I definitely have used that. Names a lot of times, things that happen in game, I want to go talk to the Apple cart guy over there. Well, his name is Granny Smith, and it's like stupid, but it's like John Smith. But not that, obviously not that, but those come off the top of my head. But then it's like, if this is an important person to the story, I'll sit on that for a while. And I like to try to evoke a feeling, but not too much of a feeling, if that makes sense. Because sometimes it's like, oh, that guy's name is Draco Malfoy. He's evil, like it's like there's like, that's like a very, we get this, like where you're going here kind of thing. I don't want to go that far, but I do like to evoke feelings with names, or have even like, okay, this is Elvish for this, and I'm going to use that. Nobody may ever find that out, but it's a little Easter egg, that if it is that. So I just kind of play with things is a really lame answer, but that's what happens. So yeah.
I typically prefer real names to high fantasy names. And not everybody likes that. So, when have you seen that meme where the girl's reading the book and she's like, they left Sniffer and went to, and they were with bluff, and it's like, she can't pronounce any of the names. Like, I'm not a fan of names with lots of Y's and L's and Z's in there that I just don't know how they go together. So I typically go with more real names. I feel like it gives a grounding. This is just all personal because there are people who love the high fantasy stuff, and that's fine. So I typically do that. Now I have gone to fantasy generators and clicked them. And typically, like Adam said, I will never pick a name that comes up in those, but I will look at that and allow it to remind me of another name that feels right. And I'll say the name, and for me, the name has to feel right, because like he was talking about evoking an emotion, like in my heart, I'm thinking of who this character is, and like certain names are just not going to work. Typically I'll take two different, like I'll click through those names and never use exactly one of them, but get something that feels similar, and then put it with something else that feels similar from a different name that came up on, 3 clicks later. And then those will go together and that becomes the name. But it has to be, again, it's not going to be like crazy consonants that you can't figure out where they fit. Although, I've used names for my characters that the GMs can never pronounced. And so I think Kagan Tracy was always Keegan by the GM. He had to say it twice and then come back to it. But yeah, I think the big thing is, like he said, you want a name that feels right and believable to you as the GM.
Yeah.
And typically your players can figure out how to deal with it. Typically what's going to happen are your players are going to like the first thing that it reminds them of. They're going to say that every single time and never say the name correctly anyway.
Yep.
And I'm at a loss right now, but I do that all the time to Adam, and he probably hates it. He's like, here's a character named this. And I'm like, oh, old, Malfoy, which I would never use Malfoy, but I'll come up with whatever it quickly reminded me of, and that becomes his name. And to the point where Adam has just been like, yeah, that's his name. Fine.
Yeah. We did that in that WoW game. There was a guy named Gorathon, and for some reason we just started calling him Glenn, and he was Glenn till the end of the game. And Danny was always like,
names are important, and the twisting and messing up of names is such a huge part of role-playing games that I love that they did a nod to that in the D&D movie when they were waiting for Jonathan. And as soon as they said the name Jonathan, everybody in the theater was like, oh yeah, because we all know that there was a guy that was supposed to be like a Jonathan that became Jonathan.
Jonathan. Oh, that's my favorite.
So
we watched that the other day, and I was
third?
Just waiting for it. Third one. So this is from Wataya Hotel 98. Haversack question: History of the World, Part 1 edition. Dear Matthew and Adam, keeping it short and sweet. How often do you implement lore or in-game world history into your games? Moreover, what are some ways that ascending GMs can do that without being boring? Is there a way to implement lore and history in a manner that makes it exciting or interesting to players? Thanks, guys. Sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98.
So this was kind of what our whole episode was about. How do you do that drip? And there's lots of different ways, whether they find a piece of lore in a book, whether they talk to somebody who just, the thing I would say is, and we've already said this, don't feel like you have to give it all at once. Okay. Don't feel like, okay, I need to do a lore dump, so I'm going to tell them everything that is about this at this one point, because what can happen is it feels like you're reciting history and everybody gets bored and they start doing other stuff. They're not listening anyway. And so they miss it. Right. So you look for ways to drop bits, I think the biggest time in the Dormant Mind, when I did like a huge lore dump, was when I talked about the whole, it was the Ancient Skull did this vision about what happened at the Vale of Frozen Tears. And so it was this huge battle and what happened between Struga Fjorga and her daughter and the whole thing. And it was long enough. I did it all in character, first of all, to keep it interesting. I didn't rush it. And secondly, I did it at the end of one. And then when I started the other one, I said, you guys last time encountered the Ancient Skald who said, and then I went through it again so that they would have had time to hear it once, digest it some, and then hear it again and digest it again. But that generally, I don't do anything that long. Generally, I'm sprinkling, and I'll put a phrase here and a phrase there and a little bit of a rhyming couplet here that is something, or someone will tell them about a story, but I don't make it terribly. You don't want it, again, that whole idea of keeping it from being boring is moving it into different characters' mouths and throughout your story as you go. For me. You're not coming through audibly.
Sorry about
there.
That.
There you go.
A lot of, I think a lot we talked about through there. The in character is like super important, I think, for the boring or not, because if I'm just going to sit there and like tell it in my own voice and like, here's a bunch of information you need to know and kind of lay that, I do think people are going to glaze over, except for like the note taker. Whoever like loves taking notes is going to go after that, and but it's a lot of it's going to be like, oh, are you still talking? So having that be part, I think like I more and more I'm liking the idea of like the use of like bards in taverns of like, yeah, they, you don't have to show up and like give an epic ballad to them with the guitar, but I think being able to say like, yeah, this bard uh, comes and begins playing on the lyre, and as you listen, he tells a story of the gods binding this great titan, with these lines of energy, and there can start to be like, oh, like, well, I've seen a line of energy, kind of thing of like what's going on with that. So I
You
think,
just made me remember. I really wanted to say earlier, when people enter a tavern, to have a bard singing an epic song and it have
yeah,
like lore in
yeah,
it. That's always a good way too.
right,
I think you just said that. So
yeah. That's like I think can be like a cool thing. One thing I like the idea of with this that I didn't bring up earlier was even like history is sometimes told differently depending on who you are, and what if you're getting two sides of what happened from, the two different sides of a battle of like, well, this is how we see it, kind of thing. And I think that can make it interesting also of like, there's also this mystery of, okay, well, what actually did happen 700 years ago when the dragons and the elves fought? Like, the two groups are saying different things, and I think that can make it interesting. It doesn't have to be that like gigantic, but even like a smaller scale
like
situation.
say the king with the royal blood and the witch in her journal,
Yep.
and there's a different side to the story that you didn't get before you
Yeah.
killed her or
Yeah.
rid the
Yeah.
town of her, and now you're like, oh, here's more lore, in that
Yeah.
journal that we found.
Yeah. I think that can be interesting. Something, I kind of, my final thought, I guess, here on this is for just interest is I've noticed a lot of times, like players ask for like, do I see anything here? Or they're making checks to search around, or, investigate or perceive or just talk to somebody. And I think those can be really, really good opportunities to drop things because it's actually like, this character is, or this player is specifically being intentional about, I'm trying to find something out. And I think, it's still sometimes it's like there literally is nothing here. Like it's a hole in the ground. There's nothing, kind of thing. But I think sometimes that can be a really good opportunity to like drop a piece of lore that maybe wasn't there. And you got to get creative on like, why is this piece of lore about the cosmos of this world in this, person's shoebox that they have under their bed? But like I think you can do some stuff in there and like reward. I'm a big fan of rewarding that, like trying to discover things. It's like maybe not every single time, but if you're trying to be intentional about that, it's like a cool thing to like actually give things, not just say, oh, you don't find anything, kind of thing. So I like that, with trying to make it more exciting and have more intentionality with it.
So you get one piece of lore that you want your characters to know about. You write it on a little piece of paper or something to remind you of it, and you keep it folded up. And the first time somebody rolls a crit 20 on some skill check, that's when you figure out a way to put that piece of lore into that spot,
right.
whatever that spot is.
Yeah, even if it's like a mysterious item that's like, why is this in the carpenter's home? This seems like it's like a really expensive thing, and it's like, oh well, that was a heirloom that's been passed down from our family, or I think you can even create mystery and like they can go after it and then realize, oh, this is part of a greater story that leads there. So yeah,
maybe even if they're looking at a blank wall and they roll a 20 and you just want to say you perceive a wall, you instead see that there's some hieroglyphs on it or something, right, Josh?
sometimes though there's a little bit of beauty in being like, it's just a wall.
It's just a wall, and you perceived it perfectly.
Yeah, those are some thoughts.
All right. Well, guys, I think that's what we've got for today. Thank you for joining us here on Rise of the GM. Adam, what are we talking about next time we get together?
So next week we are still in world building for a while, and we're going to be looking at why the world needs a hero.
Why the world needs a hero. We're going to let Tina Turner sing to us about, was it her? I Need a Hero. Why? Why did the world need it? So join us next time here on Rise of the GM as we talk about that and more. Thanks for joining us today.